Wonderful to be here. I love sharing my work with other practitioners. This is such a great audience that you've brought together. Thank you for having me. Oh, and this is my second slide. All right. Today, I'm going to share with you 7 tricks for environmental media design. I've been working in this field a long time. I think about this more than is healthy, perhaps. So when I'm out in the world, I ask myself questions like, um, do I want to watch a film that's presented to me in a gallery? I'm sure all of you have been in this situation where you're visiting a space and you come upon a piece of digital media. Maybe you're awkwardly standing in a hallway. You don't know if you're at the beginning or if you're at the end, and you don't know how long it is, and so forth. I think this is a really common example of a mismatch between media and environment. By media, I'm going to use this word as a huge catch-all today to really just mean the moving image. So this can take so many wonderful and interesting forms, and that's part of the privilege of our work. By environment, I mean everything else. And so I mean, of course, the physical environment, how light a situation is, how dark it is, what kind of seating is or isn't provided, the materials of the space, the sound conditions. But I also very much mean the social conditions, the social environment. What's the context? Are people with their friends? Are they alone? Are they with their coworkers, feeling maybe a little less comfortable? What's the whole context that surrounds a media experience. So I think it's helpful to examine maybe a more obvious and successful pairing of media and environment. So tomorrow, when Dune Part 2 comes out, it's going to weigh in at almost 3 hours. But people are happy to engage with such a long piece of media because they're provided with comfortable seating. And having a scheduled experience does a lot to empower people to make choices around how long they're going to engage. It allows them to involve their friends in a way where their friends are opting in. um, Films, of course, are linear, and this can be obvious. There's a beginning and an end. It's awkward if you walk in the middle, but also a good film has shots where if you miss a specific shot, if you look away for a moment, you might miss an important plot point. And there's a lot of situations where we are creating media where we don't get someone's full attention. Asking for someone's full attention in the 21st century is a big ask. And then, of course, there's a lot of social etiquette in a theater. I talk during movies, but I know that I'm not supposed to do that. There's a lot of shared expectation around how we engage with this media. And then something that comes up a lot in my work is that films are designed for a frame. A filmmaker can take for granted that the viewer sees the whole frame at once. And this is not the case in a lot of my work. So I think a lot about viewing position and the relationship of a viewer's body to the media design and so forth. So all of these different choices and design choices are up for grabs in environmental media design. And that's what I think makes our work so interesting. A little about me. I have a background in creative technology. That's how I started in this field. Along the way, I picked up a lot of skills in digital media, mostly computer graphics. And after working in this field for a little while, I went back to school for architecture. I went to SciArc. I hope there's some SciArc alums in the chat. So bringing this digital layer to architectural spaces, I think I do this in the service of culture and in the service of bringing people together. I think the immediacy of shared experience in a space is something that's really special and is an opportunity to create meaningful experiences. I design for a lot of different kinds of experience. Usually in the real world, I design for architecture. Architecture is very close to my heart. As I said, I started off my career as a creative technologist. I started with Obscure Digital, doing large-scale projection mapping projects. So this was one of my all-time favorites, projection mapping the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque for the 40th National Day for the United Arab Emirates. I've also contributed to some different architectural media experiences with other studios like Leviathan's 150 Media Stream. This project here at the bottom right, this is Murmurations. This is a 40-foot permanent sculpture. This is a volumetric light sculpture celebrating the grace of flight. So I love working at a large scale. I also really love presence, right? I think that's something that's fascinating to me. So I've done some projects within live performance where, again, it's about having this shared experience that's in the moment, and that's totally unique. I've worked on tours for Beck, for Bass Nectar, for Radiohead, as well as some more like artful events such as Mary Allsup's Cabrillo Festival, and this was the Hidden World of Girls. It was a collaboration with the Kitchen Sisters. So um, yeah, this is a really different way to think about media and media creation in order to make something that's expressive in the moment, that's serving the performer, and expanding the meaning of a musical experience. I also bring this work to a more pop-up format, a more retail format. This is the fun side. I think sometimes the architectural side can be a little bit serious, but it's also fun to splash out and do something that's more human scale, something that's interactive. Likewise, for events and conferences, this is an opportunity to do something, expansive and expressive. And because of my background in computation, I do a lot of work that's interactive and data-driven. So I think that interactivity creates a sense of agency for an audience, especially when we're providing information, maybe in an exhibit design. This allows people to make their own choices around what they consume, or to explore the content at their leisure. And then I think the data is a really important aspect of contemporary storytelling. It creates a sense of specificity that can be hard to come by in other ways. And making live data, again, comes back to that sense of presence and being in the moment. Something that I love about this work is that this is a team sport. I've done my best to credit my collaborators and the studios that I've worked with throughout this presentation. But also, this is ultimately, I think, something that really motivates and drives me in this work is the privilege of being able to work with really brilliant people from different backgrounds and disciplines, and just the variety of people here in this talk and joining in really speaks to that. Like, these are people who think about things in very interesting ways, and I get to work with them as collaborators. Okay, without further ado, 7 tricks. I wanted to take a cross section of my portfolio of my experience and to offer this up as kind of actionable insight. So this is a listicle, really, and I think that the listicle as a literary form is a nice way to show work without necessarily creating a grand narrative. Some of these strategies that you're going to see actually contradict each other, right? It's about making the right choice for the context for the project. Right, my first trick: frame as content. So, like I said, going back to that example of watching a film in a gallery, there are a number of reasons to include a film in an exhibit. And for the San Francisco MoMA, one such case for doing this was an exhibit that they put together called the Utopian Impulse, Buckminster Fuller and the Bay Area. So this was a project I did with Obscura Digital. I was really just doing the projection mapping, but it was fun to be involved with all of the other creatives. The SF MoMA commissioned filmmaker Sam Green to make a documentary about Buckminster and his role in the Bay Area. And Obscura Digital projection mapped it on this beautiful sculpture. It's this unwrapped Dymaxion form. So the frame itself is an artifact that represents Bucky and his ideas. Keeping it quick. So this next trick is about object enhancement. And it's about uniting digital content and physical artifacts. And this is something that many of us do in many different ways. I think that the reason to do this is, because these two things complement each other so well. Digital content allows for, flexibility, immediacy, expressiveness, all of the dynamics of information, but it can feel placeless, or it can lack a sense of presence in space. So it really benefits from having physicality. And then of course, like physical objects, they kind of can't tell their own story, or they feel kind of fixed or mute. And so here's 2 projects that show different approaches to this. So for this project, this was with Fake Love, and this was for Music Now. We put a digital interface on a car. I think Garrett Johnson is here in the chat, the CD for the project. So we made custom leather sensors, these like luscious tactile touch sensors, and we applied them to the car and then projection mapped it. So the the sensors became an interface, and the projection mapping became this UI, basically like reinforcing the interaction. And so this was a musical instrument activating the sensors, activated different sounds. And then the opposite approach, adding objects to digital media, is I think really well exemplified by this project by Slanted Studios for Viacom. So this was taking a lot of their archival footage, all the different, amazing properties that they have and shows that they've done, putting them all in a timeline to show their history, and combining them with dioramas. So these really fun little dioramas of the real world, South Park, or my favorite, the MTV astronaut. So physical astronaut, digital flag, and I think this combination really makes this a site-specific installation. It makes it something that you can only get at their headquarters. All right. My third trick. I think this is from my background working in stage and doing a lot of live visuals. I have the sensibility for making basically music videos. I had a project where I needed to work with some researchers to take STEM content and put it into an immersive format. And I really drew on this background of live visual content and live visual image making to use visual themes over a visual narrative, like that tight sequence where you have to watch every shot. So this is a project for IBM for their Think conference. The Think conference is a conference for 40,000 people in this year. And we took one space and we turned it into this immersive gallery. There are two of these cylindrical forms. They're projection mapped. So you actually can walk around the content and then into the interior and be immersed within it. We featured the work of 6 researchers. I got to work with the writer and strategist Dan Brody to tell these stories, to interview the researchers, got to get their actual research materials, their data, their models, and put it together into stories to highlight this different work. So for example, we took the work of a researcher who was using AI to analyze spoken language to do early detection of Alzheimer's and dementia. And so, we took some of the language samples that they had, we did this type treatment, made this immersive type treatment of the samples, brought in some neuroscience imagery. This visualization, actually, we licensed it from the UCSF, from the neuroscientist there. And we made this compelling immersive expression of the research. I wanted to show you
natural gas comes from about 500,000.
Let me intro this. I wanted to show you a before and after example of this. So this is one researcher. She does Internet of Things research to detect methane, and so this is her content before we worked with her and made our piece.
Natural gas comes from about 500,000 well pads in the United States, and in total, it contributes to about 35% of the electricity that we consume in the country. One of the problems with natural gas is that in its extraction and its production, you can have leaks of methane. In this, there's a challenge to both workers, the environment, and also as a cost to the producers.
So this is great content. There's nothing wrong with this content, but it doesn't translate well to a large scale, right? If we made Dr. Sosa, 20 feet tall, she would, be kind of uncomfortably giant. Likewise, this camera footage, the wobbly drone footage would make people a little bit dizzy if it were at a large scale. And it's just not as aesthetic as what we wanted to make. So what we made instead were these more, impressionistic visual themes of the work. So taking a model of an oil refinery space and rendering that to tell the story of the equipment, taking a fluid simulation and rendering that to tell the story of the way they were using AI to model weather around detecting the methane leak concentrations. And then finally making a data visualization of oil and gas well pads in the United States. There's 1 million oil and gas well pads in the United States. Half of them are in Texas. So these beautiful whirls are not clouds. This is not a weather pattern. This is basically a visualization of the geology of Texas and these extraction sites. For my next trick, we have digital wallpaper, and this really addresses the The issue of viewing content at different scales and from different positions. A lot of my work, I'm working at a very large scale, but also people can move around the screen. They can be up close, they can be far away. This is a project for Verizon's Innovation Center in Boston. This was, a building scale activation. We did activations throughout the building. We made a light installation at the top of the building. This visualizes the tides of the Charles River. It visualizes color stories for different holidays and events. And in the lobby, we have another light installation that responds to movement. We made this beautiful screen to welcome people into the space and to tell stories of innovation. This whole building is full of tech innovators, different startups. Verizon's the anchor tenant. So we wanted to, show Verizon without necessarily talking about them directly, but talking about different topics for innovation. We also did an audio installation on another floor, but I'm going to focus today on that lobby activation. One of the challenges here is that people would come in and most of their dwell time with this screen, they're up close. They're waiting for the elevator. And, so they're just a couple of feet away from the screen. And composing for this is a little bit of a challenge. You want something that fills that space, that, takes advantage of the scale, but that also is going to be intelligible and meaningful to someone who is standing right up next to it. I think it's so important to actually do the math in these situations. I like to calculate people's viewing perspective. Of course, we can see technically 120 degrees in our vision, but you can only, read more like 60 degrees of vision, and that peripheral vision is much more sensitive to motion. That's where you get motion sickness from visual content. So I really like to do the math. I recommend doing the math. Also, pre-visualizing everything really helps make the right decisions. Even though I've been doing this for such a long time, and I do have a real intuition for how content is going to feel in a space, there is no substitute for actually pre-visualizing it. So here's some samples from the subset of content we wanted to talk about. All of these different topics, Internet of Things, 5G, mobility, and we found imagery that had the sense of repeated elements to communicate these ideas at these different scales of perception. And because Verizon is such a type-centric brand, we also we typeset a bunch of research topics and used that almost as this texture as well. So this was an opportunity to, tell these stories, but in a way that was going to be relevant to people who were standing, 40 feet away, 2 feet away. I think that being sensitive to the viewer in this way really helps welcome them and make something that feels good, day after day as you come to work. Lots of people worked on this project. For this one, this is also an architectural intervention, also a lobby piece. This was more of an art piece. It's really tempting in using sculptural media or sculptural screens to use forced perspective. And that's something that I like to do, but it doesn't always work. And so this is an example of how to compose media for a sculptural screen. At ESI, we made this beautiful lobby installation. This is in Alberta, Edmonton. And these are these gorgeous LED boxes. They're like chandeliers, and there's a series of them along the ceiling. And this was my first time ever making 5-sided media, and it was, a challenge to design in terms of art direction and technically. I got to work with the amazing Adam Carlucci on this one, and we came up with some really good solutions. I think both in terms of the art and the concept, and then also our technical approach. We wanted to put worlds inside of these boxes, and we wanted to put the worlds of Edmonton, our site-specific area, as well as some other ecosystems, and then to add some artwork to extend this and create more of a sense of texture. It was pretty fun. We did things like putting snow in the box. You can see up here on the top left, this is a snow simulation. We also brought in aspens, that's the official tree of Edmonton, and we created content that could change over the seasons. So the same tree motif during the summer, it shows green leaves. During the fall, it shows yellow leaves. And during the winter, it shows snow and barren leaves. So actually making content that is intended for, this long lifespan to change over the seasons was also a really valuable challenge and such a different approach than making an hour and a half long film or a 3-hour film if you're making Dune. Again, pre-visualization was really key. Mocking up the content on the hardware we were going to use was really important to get the right sense of resolution and scale. We came up with these workflows to support this, totally custom workflows. Here's an example of forced perspective and why this wouldn't work in this space. Here we have the Canadian flag in honor of both Edmonton and Adam Carlucci, my collaborator. If you look at the flag projected across these boxes from one perspective, it looks great. It reads as a flag. But if you move around the room, then the image basically is garbled. And so we couldn't use this technique. Instead, we used a mix of orthographic rendering. You can see here on the left, the virtual cameras are pointed at each of the surfaces. And so this was the technique used to create that snow illusion. And so there's a grain simulation happening inside the box, and then it's rendered orthographically from each side and then put back on the box. But then we also were able to do some perspectival content and warp it, basically wrap it around the box. And so in this scene, we created this sense of a coral reef. Again, composing it so there wasn't a really deep perspective. The objects are arranged to feel like they're floating in the box, but then it's rendered in such a way where it can be warped and wrapped back around the box. And so you can see moving across this corner detail, there's this real sense of continuity and depth within the space. Again, a lot of really talented people worked on this. Another experience that I've had with making this really long form content is wanting to draw out the experience, to make sure that there's more for someone coming back, to make sure that the content that we're making is interesting and relevant, and that you get a little bit more each time you see it. So this is, I think, a really valuable approach to workplace media design. While I was at ESI, I got to do this project for Charter Communications. Their consumer-facing brand is Spectrum, so you'll see both of these names in here. These are 30-foot tall displays for their lobby, and the team and we made actually an hour and 20 minutes of 6K content for these screens. We made a whole array of media to tell stories about their technology, people, their brand, and the network itself. This is an internet provider. We wanted to tell stories both about the culture of the places that they served, but also to show under the hood what was happening. It was really fun to heroize their workers like this, to actually show them 30 feet tall. And so we made this whole set of information, but of course, things do repeat. The modes come up in repeat. So we had 12 different cities for these visualizations. And I think let me tell you a little bit more about the visualizations themselves. So here's an overview of some of the more culturally focused content, focusing on 12 different cities that they served across the nation, from Texas to Tampa, New York, St. Louis, and so forth, as well as some nice abstract content. But I think what was really special, what was a special opportunity about this project, was our opportunity to create these data visualizations. If there's a secondary trick to this project, it is to get C-suite buy-in at the beginning of your project. We were able to work with the Spectrum Analytics team, over the multi-year timeframe that this project was installed, and they helped us to find data stories, to tell them in a way that was, appropriate to SEC regulations. We couldn't reveal how many customers they had at any given time. We really had to manage what we were showing, to be appropriate, to be, complementary, and to be interesting. So we chose to take this really vast amount of information, but show it in a way that was proportional, to really, visually communicate it so that at a glance you can see something that's happening. moving away from showing hard numbers most of the time. What you're seeing here is a map of Manhattan, and it's divided up into latitude and longitude lines. And it's showing hour by hour over the day where people are using more and less data. So Central Park, not using very much data, but next door, Columbia, they're using a lot of data. Here's a sample of this. We did this for 12 different cities, as I mentioned. This is playing really slowly because it is intended to be played at 30 feet. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is much more detailed than you normally get to create media at. So because it's so big and so high resolution, you can get right up close to these tiles and see all of this information. It was really fun to, in a way, defamiliarize these cities. Like this is Los Angeles. You can see the LA River. And then we have these moments, just these sparing moments where we do call out hard numbers. So this is gigabytes per second being highlighted as we go along. And so, if you work here, if you're coming here day after day, you do get to see something a little bit different. You get to see a different city, maybe, or you get to see a different moment in Los Angeles, and or you might observe different things about it, like how the more industrial areas along the LA River really don't use that much data, whereas again around USC university areas, much more data use. The other data visualization that we did was visualizing data use across their entire network. So this is their national kind of data consumption normalized, across time zones. So looking at the rhythm of internet use over the day, how much more it's being used at 6 or 7 p.m. This is the peak time. It goes down, of course, in the middle of the night. And then looking proportionately at how people are using data on the internet. A lot of it is video. And then proportionally, there's a little bit less for messaging. Gaming is a lot, and so this continues to be hooked up to live data. It is a little bit delayed, for reasons that I mentioned, but this is going to show over time as gaming grows in proportion to messaging, and it will continue to bring the work that this company is doing into their headquarters. And then this is totally different. This is almost a palate cleanser compared to all of these like heavy STEM stories that we're doing. I departed from ESI 2 years ago now, and so after doing this really amazing work in the architectural field, I've come back to doing more event work, more pop-up work. It's been fun to do some shorter term projects compared to that last one that you saw. So this was a project with faculty. This is for a pop-up for Puma for Lollapalooza. So this is really fun. And this was a multi-room space. It was an experience to communicate, to share really Dua Lipa's collaboration with Puma and her signature Flutter butterfly and motifs. So I developed an experience for one of these rooms. It was an interactive visual experience, motion activated. These are her signature butterflies. And so here she is. Something that was really unique about this space is that this was tension fabric, and I had never seen people do what they did with this experience before. You can see that she's actually kind of leaning against the wall and like touching it. And people don't normally do this with LED screens. They don't do it when you're projecting on a cement wall, but when you project on a soft material surface, it allowed for this much more tactile and involved experience of the piece. I think people really enjoyed it. Okay, bonus trick. What's a listicle without a bonus item? The bonus trick is not from my portfolio. This is something that I saw at the Met that I really liked. Coming all the way back to our opening premise that maybe we shouldn't be putting so much linear media in galleries. Of course, there are great reasons to include linear media in a gallery. And this is a great example. In the musical instruments exhibit at the Met, one of my favorite exhibits there, they have some videos playing of musicians playing the instruments. But I really appreciate the extra touches that they did here to make this a more usable piece of media. This isn't touch interactive. But nevertheless, adding an interface allows me to make better choices about how I spend my time. So there's persistent titles for the players. This would feel kind of weird if you were watching a documentary. Normally, you don't leave titles up the whole time. This is great for a gallery. There's a progress bar. So if I've seen enough Appalachian traditional music, but I want to come back to see the Mali traditional music, I can figure that out for myself. And then seeing the whole playlist, what's on offer at a glance, also really empowers me as a viewer. All right, so that's the recap. All right, did it in enough time. Ultimately, there's so much possibility in working in a way that is, beyond the frame, working in this expanded format, being able to make decisions about the environment that we're working in, the context that we're creating, and being able to adapt the media that we're creating to a very specific context. I think this is a way to make really memorable, powerful, emotional experiences, and we can continue to be really thoughtful about it and to share how we approach it. If you like this, if you're interested in this kind of thing, please join me. I'll be at South by next month. Mandy Mandelstein and I are hosting a meetup for everyone like you. That will be on Tuesday, March 12th, and we are in the gaming track. So please do come by and say hello. I'd love to talk with any of you. Like I said, I think this is such a great audience that Josh has brought together. Thank you for having me, Josh.
All right, absolutely, Mary. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, you guys know the drill. You and I ask questions in the chat, and say whether you would like me to read them out or whether you'd like to go on camera and read it yourself or just read it yourself. We actually had one from Matthew Natura. Do you want to ask, Matt? Did I pronounce your name
So
wrong?
I was just wondering, there are different, for your video projects, I'm imagining that you use, more digital signage related stuff. And then for your more data-driven stuff, it looks like you use more computationally powerful systems. Can you talk about sort of your choices for technology choices?
Absolutely, yes. So I started as a practitioner, as a technologist, working on the production side, and so I didn't want to get too into the technicalities of this, but I make a lot of use of real-time software, and that's true of a lot of these projects. So going beyond standard digital signage platforms to like make custom platforms allows for incorporating data, making this content that changes over the seasons, making content that's interactive in more nuanced ways. Obviously, like digital signage does a lot of what we might want or what we might need, but I think that there are advantages to making something that's a little bit more custom.
Okay, awesome. I was going to make a quick note. Some people are mentioning that they're going to South by as well. I'll create a going to South by channel in Discord. So I added the Discord link up there. Just jump on the Discord. Tell me if you guys are going or if you're speaking, and I'll compile that into a newsletter thing that I'll send out to everybody, but also you guys can all connect there. Okay, let me ask some questions now. All right, excuse me. Ryan Schmidt, did you have a question here?
Hi there. I don't know if my headphones, can you hear me? My headphones weren't working for a little bit. Hi, I actually, Mary, thanks for this, and Josh, thank you for getting the group together. This was great. My question was building on the creative tech, the tech side of things, but I know that there's a balance between the technical requirements and the creative delivery. So two-part question, like how have you found that balance to evolve over the course of the project, from brief to, like a previs or prototypes to the final outcome? And then secondly, are there like moments that as you're putting a schedule together with a producer or a project manager or something that you're like, we absolutely need to have this? Like we need to have an in-person previs session, or we need to have, like, what are those rituals that you like to insert into those types of projects?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that having a really clear work plan for interdisciplinary projects like this, it's an art form of itself, especially with an architectural project where there are these very important coordination points. The production requires this level of commitment that you know, it's very hard to control Z in an architectural context. And so our decision making has to be very informed and very purposeful. And so I think interleaving these other disciplines, you know, like, you know, creative technology or digital artwork into the architectural practice like a trade, I think that that's an area that a number of people are pioneering, but it really is a new practice, and the level of coordination and, you know, orchestrating the right decision making along that timeline is key. So, you know, I think that doing pre-visualization, you know, in VR, that's an indispensable tool, I think, for media production, but also making sure that we're doing, you know, real world mock-ups in order to help the client understand trade-offs in decision making is really important. So going back to that Verizon project, you know, we wanted to use really high resolution LED, and that is expensive. You know, it's cheaper in some ways every year, but you could see from that text image this very high resolution, like 1.5 millimeter LEDs. It's like quite pricey, but because people were going to be so close, we knew that that would be required to have the quality of experience that we wanted. We knew that would be required to represent Verizon's brand, which is very typographic, as I mentioned, at the quality that we wanted. And so we were able to show the client and communicate with them the value of that technical choice at an appropriate time. So everyone, you know, loved the outcome.
RK had a question that he wanted me to ask, or they wanted me to ask. I don't know what that is. How do you get involved in new projects? Do they find you? Do you look for them? Are they repeat engagements? And I guess maybe the underlying question is like, you know, if you're not in this very insular world of experience design, like how do you get involved?
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, I think that I reach out to people who I want to work with. I make a point to find people that I want to collaborate with in both directions, right? So I'm reaching out to studios that I want to work with, but also to talent that I want to work with. I'm always trying to find, you know, interesting designers to collaborate with, because like I said, it's a team sport, and if especially I have a hand in putting a team together, I want it to be a really strong team. And so I think, you know, being social, finding community, finding people, making sure that you are able to, you know, offer the value, of course, you know, understanding where your expertise is and where you can plug in is really helpful. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say go to South by and go to the meetup, you know, join things like this, you know. I think you're spot on. Lisa had a question that she wanted me to ask. What is the lifespan of projects like Verizon and Spectrum? How many years will it be on display, and what's the plan for updating?
You know, it really depends. Some of these projects have, you know, I think let's see, I don't know if Michael Schneider's in the talk, but he recently posted, you know, his work. It's a project that's been running continuously for over 7 years now. I think that the hardware lifespan, I think, is a factor, right? It's like how long before something looks obsolete, and I would mark that at around 10 years, which is, you know, not an unusual time frame for like an interior design refresh anyway. And at that point, you know, someone can decide that if they want to reinvest. There's a lot of, you know, content refreshes that I think are appropriate for this kind of thing. Ultimately, I'm trying to design content that, you know, is evergreen, that is going to feel interesting and meaningful for a long time, but it always benefits from a content refresh.
Yeah. And Nathan had sort of a follow-up kind of question to that, you know, like what are some of your tricks to ensure your creative direction withstands the test of time? Oh, he says, never mind. She just answered. But you know, I think, you know, this is something we always think about is like, you know, how do you make sure that something doesn't feel gimmicky, you know, in a couple of years, you know, like, because something that feels like super new can, like, sometimes that's the stuff that can feel super old in like 2 years.
It's true. It's true. But I think that in some ways that challenge appeals to me, right? Like I went to architecture school. I love architecture. I love this idea of creating something that's timeless. You know, I love the possibility of digital media. Can we make timeless digital media? It's a great challenge.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Any more? I have my own question. So like one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, like what are the technologies now that you're excited about? Like, what are you seeing? Like, do you have an Apple Vision Pro? Like, you know, like what are you seeing out there that's like making you excited about the space?
I actually am most excited about AI for interfaces. I know that we're all really focused on generative AI and the possibilities for that, which is really exciting. But I want more, natural language interface, like higher quality natural language interface, and I want, these. I think as designers, like having new interfaces for design creation. Like I was really impressed by Descript. I think that they've incorporated this now into Vimeo. It's the ability to edit a video by editing the transcript of what the spoken in the video. I'm excited by those tools. I think tools that empower us as designers or expand what we can do.
All right. Sounds like AI for interfaces. That sounds like a
AI
good,
for interfaces.
I'm gonna put that in there for a workshop. We're gonna make that. We'll talk about that. All right. Sean had a question. Sean, did you want to ask a question? You want me to do it for you? Let's wait a few beats. How do you navigate budgetary constraints versus creative direction?
Okay, this is my superpower, I think, because I come from a practitioner background. I understand how much things cost, and I understand like where you can cut corners without sacrificing creative, versus where you can't. And I think that like having the right sized creative ambition is really important. But ultimately, all of this comes back to strategy and purpose. It's like if you have, a meaningful reason to do this work, there's a way to do it. And it's just, maybe it's like involves less technology, or maybe it involves, something, some other way to lighten the load, but there's always a way to do it.
Cool. I'll ask a question. What are the like what are the apps you're using these days? Like what's on your cut bar?
Oh yeah. Like Miro, I have Copilot right now. I'm still always using, like Rhino, Touch Designer, After
Yeah.
Effects, using those all the time. And it's so important to be able to communicate space, time, and interactivity, and those are the tools that I use to communicate that.
And and just because like I know that we're getting more and more like students coming into this space, and literally this space. So I'm trying to answer some of the questions they might have. Like, how important do you think it is for them to learn how to code, or for like how deep down the rabbit hole do they have to go into each one of these things to feel competent?
I think that as an interdisciplinary practitioner, it's so important for me to be conversant in different design disciplines. So I don't do type design, but I have made a point to learn about it so that I can discuss letting and kerning and everything else when I'm working with graphic designers. Likewise, I make a point to, I have a background in coding, but that helps me tremendously when it comes to defining features, defining capabilities, and how software is going to come together, what it's going to do, or being able to prioritize feature sets when I'm working with developers. So I think it makes sense to learn things outside of your discipline to be a better collaborator. I think that's very important. I think it's unrealistic to expect designers, UX designers, to know how to code and how to do visual design. I think that's unrealistic, and it's a little bit dangerous to push practitioners in that direction, because there is a lot of benefit to having real expertise and to having really thoughtful expertise, right? I think that when we make interdisciplinary work, it actually should be super disciplinary. We want the best of graphic design. We want the best of technology design. We want the best of architectural design. And you only get that when you have people who are deep practitioners, who pay attention to, what makes software accessible, who are paying attention to, what makes, graphic design really pop. So, right. So, splash out of your discipline, but make sure that you are really holding the torch of your own discipline as well.
Yeah, no, I think, you'd mentioned that this is like a team sport, and like it totally is, it's like, and I think I think it's also in some ways, given the challenge, like sometimes the team that you want to field is totally different, is like what I found.
It's true. Absolutely.
All right. Michael Connolly had a question. Do you want me to ask? I'll ask. What are some unique differences in design processes across the industries you've worked in?
I think sometimes I feel like a little bit of a translator, because, for example, there's like redundant language, so when I'm talking with architects about, program, they mean activities. And then when I'm talking about, developers about program, we're talking about software. So I think making sure that I'm, tuned into the right, language context, the right language space is really important. Uh, in terms of like design process, right, it's like I think the design often is like in response to a brief, in response to a certain set of constraints. So as a creative director, I feel like I'm often like making a different brief for each discipline, and there's a sequence to that. Making sure that usually I'll work with the physical designers first to define a space, and then I can hand that defined space to an environmental graphic designer so that they can do their work. So it's almost like a sequence of briefs. And they are all different. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so funny because I feel like sometimes this space is so multidisciplinary, and it's also so much of a folk art. Like I feel like so much of it is learned on the job. Like I'm like curious, like when you're even thinking about like visitor journey or dwell time, like how long you should make something, like is that something you learn in architecture school, or is that something that you just have to figure out as you're doing these things?
It's both, but I think there's no, like, it's hubris if we think we are doing all of this for the first time, right? It's like if
Totally.
if you think you're doing it for the first time, it's probably because you haven't read enough, or so
Or don't know
so
where to what. Yeah.
well, so I, and obviously, like, I can't as a one person know all of these things as deeply as I would like. But I really do try to read and pull in best practices. So I actually read a lot of UX books to get best UX practices for communicating complex interaction for an audience. It's a great discipline for drawing on for that. Yeah, in terms of dwell time, I mean that's something that people talk about in architecture, but I actually try to I'll calculate it. I'll calculate people's field of view. I'll calculate how long we think it's going to take them to move through a space.
I think that's so important. I mean, I honestly look back on like the early like Blue Cadet projects, and like I'm like, oh, this would have required a 3-hour dwell time. Like we've given them like a full book to read here. Like this is a terrible thing. I think we have time for one last question. Sarah asked me to read this. Thinking about design as a team sport and reflecting upon your tricks you've picked up along the way, are there any lessons or tricks that you experienced resistance to? Hope so. Something that you had to be pushed to embrace, but it really paid off. Do you have any advice about embracing new ways of thinking, designing, working, etc.?
Oh my gosh, this is such a big question. It's such a great question. Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on something that it took a little while to embrace. I'm sure that there is something. Um, like in terms of embracing new ways of thinking or designing, I think that really, just doing your best to understand your coworkers and what they need from you in order to understand you, in order to, deliver what they need. Um, like being curious about how people are thinking and working, and not making it so it all comes down to fundamentals of communication, I think, and just continuing to work with new people. Yeah, ultimately, I think that I've worked with so many studios, and at every studio things are done differently. Every studio is unique, and I've learned so much from being able to work with these different practitioners. There's so many people who've been role models for me, who I've picked up a technique here, a technique there, around like communicating to clients, or defining a brief. And I know I have more to learn.
I'm gonna also I've been thinking about this. I listened to a podcast about like love languages, like which is completely like not a design podcast. But I think it's like I was like, oh, like everyone has their own love language. It's like, like prototyping sometimes is like a good love language for some people, and some people like it's just not how they do it, and it's like, and I think there's always this tendency to sort of like find like this is the right solution, and then like I feel like so much about it is like finding like the right solution for the team that you're working with, the client that you're working with, like, and like you got to sort of figure out their language. So listen to some podcasts about love language,
Yes.
or I'll find someone to talk about love language for one of these webinars. So Mary, we got 3 minutes left. Just I'll let you have the last word. Obviously people should come and check out what you're doing at South by. Is there anything else you sort of want to communicate to the future space community, or anything like that?
Well, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks everyone for coming. I'd love to, I don't know, talk with all of you. Please do get in touch, and yeah, hopefully our paths will cross sooner than later.
All right, fantastic. Mary, thanks again for being here. Thanks everybody for joining. Tucker, I will see you next week. I hope to see many of you next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll catch you next week then. See y'all.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mary.